Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Everett.
Hey, I'm Ben Barron.
Yeah, today we're going to talk about thriving together using associate resource groups to span boundaries. Some people may know these as ERGs.
That's right. That's right. And what we're hoping is that all of you listening and watching are going to be able to walk away from this with some understanding of a few key terms, things like adaptability, agility, grit, hardiness, resilience, and understand a little bit about why they matter. We're also going to talk about some reasons why this idea of boundary spanning is so important. In fact, we would argue it's critical for organizations today. And then we're going to talk about some best practices for associate resource groups and how they can be used to span boundaries and really build community within organizations.
Yeah, so I guess let's just get into it.
Why not?
Yeah. So so let's talk about some key concepts that are critical to thriving in the face of adversity and change, which is something that if you're on this planet Earth, I think everybody's really going through right now.
Yeah. 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 These are turbulent times. Even if we did not have this thing called COVID, we would certainly be experiencing, just like all of us do every day, certain stressors in our lives. And dealing with turbulence and change is a way of life. Certainly, we've all been tested during these past few months, and we will continue to be so. But some of these ideas that are really important for us to keep in mind, or to at least have an understanding of, include things like adaptability. So, what's adaptability, Chris?
Right. So we'll go through some terms that help with this. So adaptability is changing your mindset or behavior to match your situation.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of us could go through life. I know, sometimes, my wife will say I'm a bull in a china shop because I just have one way sometimes of going when I'm doing stuff. You know what, getting out the door with my two kids. Oh no, my wife is way more adaptable. You're like, oh, wait a minute, permission slip for the group project or field trip or something that completely throws me out. As somebody who's in the military, checklist process. Well,
Right.
that doesn't work with a 5 and 9 year old daughter at all.
No, no. So this idea that you can change your mindset or your behavior to match your environment or your situation is a really important thing, right? And that's this idea of adaptability. And that differs a little bit though from this idea of agility, which is a little bit more proactive. It's about trying to sense and respond to your environment and do so in a rapid way. This is certainly something that has been tested for all of us, I believe, during the last few months and is an important component to dealing with ongoing change.
Yeah, and there's also this idea of grit, and that's
Grit.
that's just not giving up.
Yeah.
You're persistent as you pursue your goals. So, as we're facing these trying times, focusing on your goals. I know there's a lot of stuff going on, but not giving up is important.
That's right. That's right. The another related idea is what we call hardiness. And this is the idea that as you are going through adversity, when you can harness kind of the power of meaning and purpose and realize what you're doing and why you're doing it, and have that at the forefront of your mind, you can really make it through some tough circumstances. We know this from research in the military, of course. We know this from research on other people who have been through extreme situations. That one way that they get through it is by realizing that they're part of something bigger, that there's a bigger purpose and meaning to life. And these ideas can be very powerful for us psychologically. And these all tie into an underlying idea, which is resilience. So, how do we define resilience?
So, resilience is bouncing back from adversity and change.
Yeah.
Um, there's behaviors that we can have. I've had a bit of a bread baking problem since the pandemic started. And I don't know, how my wife say, I don't know if eating that much bread every day is the best choice when dealing with the pandemic. It's definitely been fun. Some of the artisan bread baking blogs and stuff that I'm following right now. And it's been good, but that's not necessarily a resilient behavior on my end. Um,
Right.
this is an idea of you're taking that hit, right? And that may push us back a little bit, but the bouncing back is the other side of that, where it's like, okay, uh,
Mhm.
all right, now it's time to move forward. So,
Yeah. And what's amazing for all of us as humans is that if we think about it, uh, we as a species are incredibly resilient. We can bounce back and adapt to the most trying of circumstances. And even if you reflect upon your own life, and certainly as I reflect upon my own life, there are times when things didn't go as expected, when I had to make it through adversity, had to manage the unexpected. I think all of us have been through those circumstances, and just by reflecting upon those and realizing that, hey, I made it through, that can also give us a little bit of a psychological boost and some resilience, realizing that, hey, I've made it through adversity before, I can do it again. And so we get better at these types of practices and these psychological principles of adaptability and agility, grit, hardiness, resilience. We get better at them by practicing them and by learning from others. Other people have gone through tough things. I can make it through tough things too. So these things can help us when our sense of life and work get turned upside down, which boy have they ever in the past several months. Here we're recording this in early September of 2020, and it's been an interesting time for the entire world since the middle of March, really.
yeah, things we know from the research is items like willpower they're like a muscle, you know.
Mm.
I know in the army they'll say, "All right, do push-ups." And when I first joined, I mean, I still have a limit on push-ups. But, when you start doing the push-ups and eventually you can't push anymore. And then I go into what I call the crying push-up. You know, as you're there, right? But when we practice, I mean, this is a real message of hope, Ben, is that when we practice these skills of adaptability, which it requires you to change your mindset, and we'll have something to go out with this with these definitions. But when you practice your agility, like sense making and maybe responding in a way you haven't responded before, grit, hardiness, resilience, these are things, these aren't, well, you got what you got. Life deals you a deck, you got to play it. That's not what's happening here. And the science actually shows that you can practice. But that may mean when you take that punch, right? When you have a pandemic or something like that going on. But even without pandemics, we face these things. Life changes, a whole host of events that'll happen. These are opportunities for us to, lift some weights.
Right.
Um,
And I think it's important for us to recognize the stressors that all of us are experiencing right now. And sometimes just by realizing that we are all going through various forms of these can be a source of strength even for all of us as we go through it. So, what are some of the big stressors that are going on right now? I think things, from our conversations with other people in business, from our own experiences, from talking with our family and friends, it's hard. We're working from home, many of us, right? That is sometimes easy, but it also can be difficult. We're dealing with social isolation, which can be tricky as well, right?
Yeah, friends and family members. I know a lot of people are losing their jobs that I know,
Right.
and that's really tough. One spouse is now at home, where the other one used to work from home and have it all to themselves, and they're like, oh my gosh, if I love my spouse, but maybe I don't love them for 24 hours a day.
Well, and because of some of these other dynamics, we have people who are maybe moving into homes with each other due to a loss of jobs. We have, maybe kids are coming home. I was talking with my neighbor yesterday who said it feels like I'm running an Airbnb now because without the pay, because my kids who have graduated from college are, there's delays in their employment and some are going to graduate school and they're back in the home. So this is another aspect of our lives that's being shaken up and another stressor that's adding onto our plate. And, we may have people who are living with their parents, elder care issues. You may have health concerns related to COVID itself. This is a pandemic and it's a serious issue that we are all dealing with. So these can be tough issues.
Yeah, and some of us are teaching our kids at home. Not everybody's school went back.
Trying.
Ah, and it's I mean, these are brutal items,
Yeah.
but we can either be fragile
Hmm.
and break apart during these times, which is okay. And so I just want to say that eyes wide open, looking some of the trite stuff that I see on the internet. Oh, just pretend it's a sunny day. I mean, none of that stuff ever worked for me.
Hmm.
The stuff that did work for me, and there's some evidence of this in the literature, is opening up your eyes, taking a hard look at what's going, take the hit. It's okay. Cry, call up a friend. Don't bake as much bread as I did. But these are real problems. We have an elder care situation and some mental health issues with a family member that has moved in with us. This has been brutal on our family dynamic and my wife and I's relationship as we get the opportunity. I know, I hate, boy, oh boy, got that opportunity to
Yeah.
practice adaptability, grit, resilience, hardiness. But these are muscles that we work out. And what's great is, and something that I learned from the military is when you're really struggling on a run or maybe an obstacle course or something that you got to do, and you see somebody out there giving it a hard try, right? Maybe they're not winning every time. It's inspiring, right? So, hey, when you got that energy, pick up that resilience and hardiness and grit and go for it. You'll inspire other people. And, you can get this virtuous cycle. Share what you're doing, also share your struggles and those kinds of items.
Right. And, another thing that we can do on a practical level, aligning with what you were just talking about in terms of dealing with all of these different stressors, is trying to sort through and having an honest look at what are the things that I can and cannot change about my environment? What is my sphere of influence? And when we find ourselves trying to change those things that we can't change, that's not productive. But there usually are some things that we can change. And if anything else, we can change how we think about the various stressors in our lives. And this, I'm reminded of this really wonderful quote from a man named Viktor Frankl. And for anyone who's watching or listening to this, I encourage you to check out his book, Man's Search for Meaning. Now, Viktor Frankl was a Jewish psychiatrist during World War II, and he was imprisoned in the concentration camps. He was separated from his family. He wrote this book afterwards, incredible story, and he had a psychological perspective on it because of his profession. And one thing that he wrote, and I think is a wonderful way for us to think about stress and our relationship with it, is he says, and I quote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom.
Yeah,
Our ability to choose."
I think that's inspiring because
Mhm.
one of the things that happens to our psyche when crazy stuff like pandemics go on, or, I graduated from grad school in the last recession and I just had a baby, you know, and
Yeah.
there were just no jobs out there. And I remember having that tearful conversation with my spouse in the kitchen of like, I may have just spent a lot of money and we don't have like a sports car sitting in the driveway, am I a numbskull or what, And we can take that and just stay there. But here's somebody, and the Holocaust is way worse than anything I've faced
Well, of
in
course.
my life by a long shot. But here, Viktor Frankl is saying, hey, there's agency no matter how dark it is. And it's that moment when we can practice these skills of agility and grit and those kinds of items that between when we get hit, the more we practice it, inevitably things happen in life. We get hit by those items. We have that pause and our agency when you want to stand up to something, be that, a debilitating life disease or a challenge or whatever it is, your agency is found in your response.
That's right. So I just want anyone who is watching or listening to this to realize that you do have power, even when you feel like things are out of your control. We always have have control over our reactions and over how we think about different situations. And that in and of itself can be a powerful path toward resilience.
Right.
S-
Another thing I want to talk about is this idea of stressors that you face. A lot of these things that we get our identity from,
mm,
our position, what we do for work,
sure.
certain community events. Those are awesome. Great. Get your identity from those things. I think that's a wonderful thing to do. But what happens is when those things are stripped down to the core, you find a camaraderie with the broader base of humanity. this is where empathy is. So even if somebody is struggling with something to the left or your right or any of that kind of thing, you have that basic humanity piece. You put your pants on one leg at a time and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, so those times when everything's kind of stripped away or challenges are being faced, this is a time that you can say like, okay, what what there's this whole inner life of the mind that's worth exploring, and who I am as a person sans some of those different items that might have given me some identity before.
That's right. That's right. And this ties into our conversation here today about thriving in adversity and using within an organization these groups, associate resource groups or employee resource groups, as a way to build community, as a way to span boundaries. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that as an important concept in the workplace. Um, the workplace, of course, is a place where we do derive much of our identity. We find ourselves as part of different groups, and that's important to many of us. There are ways in which that can be even stronger within our organizations, and ways in which organizations can do this to truly build up the entire organization. And that's what we're going to talk about here in a few moments. So maybe this brings us to this idea of boundary spanning within an organization. So, before we define it, one thing that I'm always reminded of when I think about this topic is kind of the cliched metaphor of the silo of the organization, right? People say my organization is full of silos, right? And sometimes I have to explain to some of my students what a silo is. So, in addition to doing this podcast, of course, I'm a professor, and
Yeah,
you know,
there's that whole genre of music, right? That's got banjos. Like a Mumford and Son is one of these. And it's like, you got to wonder, have these guys ever been on a farm? They get a beard, they wear Oshkosh bagosh. Is that even a thing? Whatever. They wear the jeans with the clasps, and they play this music, and then they don't know what a silo is.
yes, tall windowless structures that are typically used for holding grain and corn and stuff like that, right? But our
Right.
organizations can develop these, and they don't have windows, right? Where you have barriers between departments, between functions. And this can be destructive for long term productivity because much of the work that happens in our organizations happens in that white space on the organizational chart.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, people think I'm going to design my organization. Look, now there's software that helps do this. Right. I'm like moving my hands here.
That's right.
But you have somebody at the top, and then their reports, and then their reports, and then look, it's a beautiful designed organization, and everybody's a cog in the wheel. And that can be okay in some places. Like I know in like an infantry platoon in the army, everybody kind of has a role.
Mm-hmm.
But when shenanigans happen, those it's nice for those pieces to not be so strongly solid that, I'm going to go ask James in accounting, is this true? Because it doesn't sound right. And then I can resonate that to somebody. So when we talk about the white space, we're talking about all that magic that happens outside the central org chart plan.
Right. And it brings us to this wonderful idea and way of thinking about this called boundary spanning. So, how do we define boundary spanning, Chris?
So we boundary spanning are it's behaviors that bridge networks, groups, and information within or outside an organization that otherwise would remain separate.
Yeah. These are the people who function as kind of those bridges through the silos. They help to break down those barriers by having these interlocking networks. So you may think about these different networks that develop in an organization where you typically work with these people, you talk with these people. If those people don't have anyone who kind of links them to other parts of the organization, then you can start to run the risk of having these silos develop within the organization. And that can close off information flow that's really useful. You can also think of boundary spanners as those people that link the organization with external types
Right,
of
right.
entities, which can be very helpful for innovation and so forth as well. But this idea of boundary spanning is such an important one, and it ties into this idea of how we deal with stress, how we deal with all of the different things that are going on, how we can be resilient, because we need interaction with people. We need to have connection with people in order for us to better cope with the world around us.
Right. And it's not only that, I'm a veteran. And I know that when I got back from my deployment to Afghanistan, you
Hey,
know, the
I was there.
yeah, that's actually where Ben and I met was on a deployment in
That's
Afghanistan.
right.
Over a lot of caffeine over that year. But anyway, I remember coming back. I was back for a week, and I started a job as a director of operations at an organization, and they hadn't really had a whole lot of veterans there
Hmm.
that had deployed. I mean, there were a couple that worked there, but it was always like, oh, you deployed? What's that about? And or oh, you're still in the National Guard? Uh, you get to leave for some annual training in the summer for 2 weeks?
Hmm.
They just didn't know. Like this was not, these guys were not patriotic or something like that.
Right.
They just didn't know. So that was one of the things that, we ended up starting a small group, but we were able to bring in some knowledge so the organization could improve its interaction with veterans.
Right. And we form groups kind of naturally as humans. Now you may be thinking about someone who doesn't like to be around other people, and so there's some variation in terms of how much we feel that personal need to affiliate with others. But we do this all the time. We do this formally, we do it informally with people at work, with people outside of work. And these groups, be they some demographic similarity you may have with people, or maybe it's functional, you all do a similar type of job. Maybe it's just proximity based. It's someone who works in a similar area to you, or whatever. These are all parts of how we live, how we experience the world. We naturally kind of create these groups, and it helps us identify or think about our own identity because it helps me realize, okay, I am one of these. I am not one of those, right? Which is okay and it's natural. It also has some problematic features to it, but this happens in our organizations. So you think about your department or your function, right? We do this a lot.
Yeah. So in group, out group, it's going to happen naturally. The question is are those out groups really treated negatively?
Hmm.
I something that some soldiers played over in Afghanistan, and that matter of fact, some people in my neighborhood here they like to play this Pokemon Go game. They have this. They walk around with their phones and they capture these Pokemons. I have no interest in Pokemon Go, but those guys have a great time. But they'll see me on, for a, maybe a get together with the kids or let's watch a sporting event together type thing. Definitely interested in. So even though they kind of have an in group that does Pokemon Go, I don't feel excluded by their formation of a group. And so that's one way to think about how to have that
Yeah.
natural dynamic of in and out not be unhealthy.
Right. And so this is a little bit of a foreshadowing of what we're going to talk about here in a little bit, because when you have these types of groups within your organization, these associate resource groups, employee resource groups, that can really help to cohere a group together. But you want to be careful and make sure that that is a healthy type of dynamic and is one that is happening not to the detriment of others, that it's just, something that is being exclusionary versus inclusionary. And so those are some ideas that we'll talk about here in a few moments. So we don't want to create those boundaries that are too closed or non-overlapping. We need those boundary spanners to exist within our organizations.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's helpful to think about this idea, just having that in your vocabulary. I think this challenge requires some boundary spanning here.
Mm,
I'm going to reach out. And just like we talked about silos from an organizational piece where everybody has their spots, well, healthy organizations will bridge fluidly those different pieces. Um, but just like we have those lines and those structures can create ways in which people don't span boundaries just because it sets up a structure that doesn't allow that to happen. If we're not careful with how we think about in groups and out groups in our minds, we'll make invisible silos that aren't on anybody's PowerPoint. And
mhm.
that's not helpful, not only for the organization, but it's not a very fun way to be as an employee in an organization.
That's right. That's right. One really interesting thing when we consider these associate resource groups is that they can, because they kind of, especially if they're non-functional in nature, and it's okay to have functional kind of professional development types associate resource groups. But you think about one, so for example, maybe one on veterans, and I'm just using that as an example because both you and I are veterans, and you could have people from all different parts of the organization, all different functions, potentially some different demographics, different other interests, and so forth, all coming together, bound by this unifying fact that they are all veterans. That in and of itself is actually a boundary spanning activity, because those people are then getting together, they're learning about different parts of the organization, learning about some different experiences, and that can be a really helpful vehicle for information flow, as well as just it can be fun, right? We want things that are fun in organizations. You and I talk a lot about how some organizations do a lot, it seems almost intentionally, to drive the fun out. And I don't care how old you are, you still like to enjoy life, and enjoy life even at work with the people around you.
Yeah, I know. And like Pride Month is one of the funnest months, I think, out of the year. And in organizations that have an LGBT, ERG, ARG group, um, not only have I had a good time celebrating other people's lives that work with me, I've met other people within the organization that are fantastic. And they're also an educational piece, as people have been very kind and patient to teach me things that I didn't know about a whole community that's just all over the place.
Right, right. Yeah, another thing that I'm thinking about is, we're talking about these benefits and some of these ideas that are really great with regard to associate resource groups. But sometimes there's cynical people out there who may say, well, if I'm an executive, why should I really care about this? Shouldn't we just be focused on, you know, making money here, or doing whatever the organization is designed to do? Uh, why should anybody care about these types of ideas of boundary spanning and creating an environment in which people can truly feel included?
Well, first of all, I love the cynics in an organization. I think they're a helpful, they kind
Sure.
of hold up a mirror to say, is what's going on baloney? I mean,
Yeah,
I think everyone should, it's not all let's, sing kumbaya and go skip
it's a good
down by
point.
the lake. So, but in this idea of boundary spanning, and why should executives give a rip about that, is you can't design this kind of awesomeness
Hmm.
in an organization, this kind of white space, social mentorship. I mean, there's a whole host of tools that comes socially into your organization. In accounting, we call it goodwill. Once how much of the chairs and the buildings and the intellectual property and the discounted cash flows and net present value of all these different assets. And you're like, well, wait a minute, that's still worth more. Well, some of that goodwill within the organization are these social bonds and intellectual process knowledge that people just have from marinating in your organization for a while. So ARGs, ERGs, when they're done right, really enhance that. And I mean, if you're a listener right now and you're a member of that, you kind of know that. But
Right,
that's something you can really use to kind of toot your own horn, if you will, about that stuff.
right. And I think from an executive standpoint, I think, it's good to realize that, hey, these groups that are formed, these connections that are being made within an associate resource group, these are powerful levers, actually, for communication, for molding and shaping our culture, and dealing with change. And so it should be something that is embraced by top leaders, and celebrated, because it is very powerful, or it can be very powerful, and it can be useful, not just for the associate resource group itself, but also for the bigger and broader organization overall.
Right. And thankfully, I've not heard of, I actually can't think of a time that I've met an executive that's like, we got to get these ERGs out of here.
Yeah, or
Like,
at least they haven't told it to us. Yeah.
but that being said, you and I in our consulting practice, when we do executive coaching and stuff, they're like, I just can't get why isn't this moving? I can't get the traction I need and all of that stuff. One of the things that can be hampering that is a good communication plan and some of these other tools that create traction socially within an organization. ERGs, ARGs, if you don't have one, go get one. They're pretty groovy for those kinds of things.
Yeah. So maybe we'll turn our attention now that we've covered some of these foundational ideas that can help us in times of stress. We've talked about this idea of boundary spanning. That brings us to this idea of some of the best practices for associate resource groups to really help use them to span boundaries to build community within an organization, especially large organizations. This can be a powerful tool. So let's talk a little bit about that. We are evidence based in what we do on our podcast and everything else, and so we like to look at the research on these topics before we talk about them. And so that's what we did here. Now, this is a newer area of research. Not that employee resource groups or associate resource groups are a new thing; they've been around for a while, but the research hasn't really been kind of kept apace of that growth. But there are some things that we do know about them, and we're going to share some of those with all of you here. So these are not just our opinions or conjecture necessarily.
Yeah, there's so many people. I mean, one of the frustrations for me is on the internet and LinkedIn. It's like, cure this organizational woe with Windex and these 3 easy tricks. Well, and it's like, man, how when you're saying that stuff, how do you even know that stuff?
Right.
And so we think it's really important to address the research and be honest where it's not. So versus capacity planning, there's gobs and gobs and gobs of
Sure.
research and papers on that stuff. ERGs, because people have socially evolved these more recently within organizations, is a emerging area of study.
That's well put. One way that we can also think about it is that the idea of associate resource groups has strong theoretical foundations. And when I say theory as a social scientist, so I'm an industrial and organizational psychologist by training, when I say that, I mean a body of knowledge that has developed about a certain idea, not just some conjecture.
Gravity
When I
is a
say
theory,
right,
but
right.
nobody goes out their front doors saying, I don't know.
Exactly.
I'm going to float away today.
Right, right. So some of the theories that we have about social identity and identity in
Mm,
organizations really inform how we can think about employee resource groups or associate resource groups, whatever you want to call them. But there are some things that we do know. One thing that we know is that, hey, this is something that these ideas of forming people together based upon some sort of shared characteristics in organizations, this is something that is increasing in organizations, right? Long time ago they were called affinity groups, and then they kind of morphed and people started calling them resource groups and so forth.
Orgs
And
love to name things.
they do, right? Yes, they do. And so interest in these groups has continued to increase. And going back to this idea of identity, one way we can think about it is that we are complex. Like you are a very complex person, Chris Everett, right?
Thanks for that. It doesn't feel like that sometimes.
I'll vouch for it. You're a complex person. I'm a complex person. We have differing motivations and
Right.
identities. And we can think about these identities in a couple different ways, right? So, one of them is just your kind of your core job identity. What am I hired to do? But you have other
Right. And
identities.
I hate that we listed that one first because I don't think that's the most important identity,
Mhm.
but in no particular order. Um, one of those is core job identity, and
Sure.
that's just what you're hired to do or what you do for work if you're a volunteer.
Yep. Yep. And what are some other identities that you might have at work?
Let's see. So we got team member identity. So I'm part of this team, like a sports team at your work, those kinds of things. An interesting one is the innovator identity.
Mm,
And that is some people really identify with coming up with or helping implement new ideas.
yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Another one might be your career identity. And so your career identity would be kind of your particular field and professional development within that career path. It also could be just your overall organization member identity, how you identify with your organization. And it's interesting when we measure this on surveys and so forth, one of the items that we use to measure that is, if I heard someone talking good about my organization, I would feel good hearing
Right.
that, or vice versa. If I heard someone speaking ill of my organization, I would take it personally. That's one way to kind of measure this idea of how much identification you have with your organization. All of these kind of meld together to give us a sense of who we are. And ARGs, associate resource groups, are part of this, or they can be part of this.
They definitely enhance it, right?
Mm,
If you, it's hard to feel part of a group if you're never part of a group, you know.
right.
And I know. So, like we were talking about a career-based identity. You know, I do a lot of work before we formed our group, our consulting group, then with IT developers, and I still work with them. But you know, lots of times they're on contracts for 12, 18, 24 months at a
Mm,
place, and then they go to the next organization. So one of the places they get their identity are through groups like the .NET Developers Group, the Java Users Group, you know, those kinds of things, because they can't get them really from their organization so much. But you know, ARGs, ERGs, if you're a large organization that somebody could do their whole career at, you know, I saw this interesting post on LinkedIn the other day about somebody, I think they've done 40 some odd years at Disney,
wow.
and you know, as a groundskeeper and then some other type roles. And I mean, it was amazing. The guy definitely identified with Walt Disney and the mission and those kinds of items. um that was helpful. But it can also be helpful in organizations where you have that long kind of thing, is how do you make it more personal? Because if you're an entrepreneur founder and you start your org, maybe you're five developers in a garage, or somebody with a catering business, just a few people. It's easy to have that cohesive identity. But as organizations get bigger and bigger and bigger, to feel that sense of connection,
Mm-hmm.
we've got to, you know, parse it down a little bit. And
Right.
ARGs are one and a good way to do that.
Right, right, and oftentimes these emerge, or they have some founding in
Hmm.
things that people have in common. Right, these are other ways that people associate and form these groups within their organization. So you could have social cause centered ARGs, for example, where people join because it's a chance to be part of something bigger. Maybe it's a bunch of people who really care about the environment or some other volunteering type of activity. Some of them are professional centered. Maybe people join that for more professional development, or more attribute centered. We hear about these a lot. So, it could be one for veterans, it could be one for certain demographics within the organization to help people feel like they belong. And, you'll see these oftentimes for underrepresented minorities, of course. And it provides a vehicle for those people to have a sense of identity, a sense of social cohesion, that they might otherwise be missing out on if they are simply out there in the organization and don't realize that, hey, there's a bunch of other people out here like me. And like you mentioned, especially important in the large organizations, right? When you're talking thousands of employees, then it can become really important and powerful to have these other ways that we identify with each other.
Yeah, this is the stuff that makes life sweet, right? Now I love my work. I know lots of people that love their work, but if they said, "Hey, would you have work with no social interaction?" There's not many people that would say yes. So this
Right.
isn't fluff. This is about how we're wired as humans on this planet.
That's right. That's right. And, when we look at the best practices around associate resource groups, one thing that seems to emerge is that a key differentiator between those that are high performing, the really great associate resource groups, and the ones that are lower performing, people who say that they're not going so great, has to do with the leaders of those groups. Now, this is not a shocking finding. I'm sure many people listening to this, if you do anything with associate resource groups, you may realize that this is the case. But this really points to how associate resource groups are really dependent upon those leaders of them, and how development of those leaders and helping them with their leadership skills can really be the difference between a good associate resource group and a bad one.
Yeah, and here's a quote from one of the pieces of literature that we looked at on ARGs, which we'll have these available, and you know, for those that are interested. But ARGs that are having the most impact in their organizations use innovation to drive change and leverage their actions both within and outside their ERGs, which is boundary spanning,
Right.
right? But
Yeah.
here's the thing: if you're an ERG, ARG, you're kind of like your own little company or organization.
Mm.
So everything that applies to any organization applies to you. So one of the things that they said, so the first thing that my consulting mind goes to when you say, "Oh, well, if these are successful depends on the leadership." Is that a people-based success or a
Mm,
process-based success? So one of the things that, and I guess we'll just kind of hop into some of these, but one of the things that we look at for any organization is, can they be resilient themselves and successful? So if you're a leader of an ERG, ARG, starting to develop the people within that organization so that you have a replacement plan is important, because you don't
yes,
want to go through a series of iterations. It actually hurts your group, just doesn't mature,
that's
right?
right.
You're at beholden to whatever person has the time and longevity to dedicate to doing that stuff.
Right.
So, yeah,
And in most large organizations have some sort of talent management function in which the organization is continually thinking about who are the high potential leaders in the organization, who's the next generation of leaders in the organization, and how do we make sure that they're ready to take that responsibility when the time comes. You need to have in your associate resource group, what this implies is that you need to have talent management within your associate resource group so that you have people who are getting ready to take the reins and move forward, because you don't want to have the amazing associate resource group that's dependent upon a handful of people who are just working so hard to keep it together, because those people eventually run the risk of getting burned out. And you want to make sure that you have people who can take that load and also get these amazing leadership experiences in the associate resource groups. This
yeah,
is a case in point for why and how an associate resource group can be an amazing resource of sorts for the organization, right? This is kind of a little bit of a talent management uh, factory, if you will, where these people can get those stretch experiences and can help develop their own leadership skills in a relatively low risk type of environment. And it's kind of like volunteering. You get a lot of experience that way and can learn a lot about yourself and how you can lead and develop others.
yeah. So when we look at the benefits of ARG, ERG, brings people together.
Yes.
It helps share information within the organization, bring new information into the organization, kind of a sensing function, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a great place to practice those leadership skills, speaking skills, expand your relationships within the organization. It's like, man, now I know people in all these different silos over here that I wouldn't known. And these are times to practice your mentorship. Maybe it's risky to step out there in an org environment. Especially if you're an executive, maybe taking the helms of a team for a new time, or maybe you're helping project manage a new initiative. Maybe you're an individual contributor that just has, key pieces they got to brief during a clutch meeting. Well, you can start to build those skills that will set you up for success within the ERG, ARG. Now, that shouldn't be your only, hey, Hal, why are you over here? Well, I just want to practice speaking. That that's for Toastmasters. You need to be ethically and in your heart aligned with what that group is about. But that being said, if you are, the best ERGs, ARGs provide that opportunity and a place that is safe for people to practice those things, to help both the organization and the goals of that ARG, ERG.
Right. And if you're thinking about your associate resource group as its own little organization, so to speak, what we know about organizations and how they improve is that the best ones do some periodic systematic reflection and maybe even some measurement on how they're doing, and then use that information to continually get better. And so the best ARGs out there are ones that treat their organization as something that is a work in progress at all times. They do that periodic reflection and continual improvement, making sure that what they're doing is aligned with what the organization needs and is meeting the needs of the members within the ARG. So take that time, be intentional about your leadership. Good ARGs, ERGs do not happen by accident.
Right,
It
right.
takes work. It takes some planning. It takes some effort. But the rewards of that certainly can be substantial.
Well, say in any organization that launches, Lots of times everybody just starts doing. And and then eventually everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, we're irrelevant. It doesn't make sense anymore." Well, that's because you haven't been periodically updating your vision and strategy. So annually, biannually, at a cadence that makes sense, the best ERGs, ARGs will reflect on their mission and goals and help clarify. That's a good practice too for stuff that you'll do in broader organizations. So now
Right.
let's turn the ARGs, ERGs that aren't thriving, like the dynamic ARGs that we just described. What does kind of suboptimal look like then?
Wow. So when they're not going well and are not intentionally um, engineered or curated to be the best that they can be, a bad ARG is one that's really set up to create kind of an us versus them mentality, where it's like we're part of our this group, and you don't get to come in, and this can undermine some of the goals because you're not gonna of the organization because you're not gonna have that boundary spanning occurring then. It's actually starting to create perhaps some unintentional silos. uh, you know, that's when it kind of ceases to become a resource for the organization, and it's just more of a special club that people get to be part of. So I would caution against those types of outcomes because it's also a bad. I would say bad ERGs, ARGs are also ones that just don't do the mentoring and developing that we talked about either.
Yeah. So, and we hate to use the word bad, but
No,
if
there's
you care
bad ones
about
out there.
it, yeah, if you care about your group members, you want to be
Yeah.
mentoring and those kinds of things. And here's the other thing: there's a mixed review on do you let people in that are outside your ARG,
Mm,
ERG? So if you're LGBT ERG, there's somebody that's not in that community allowed. I've seen it done really well both ways.
mm.
And this is where let your heart and mission be your guide. How might we do this in a way that doesn't create division and exclusion within our organization?
Right.
So there's no wrong answer to that kind of, different ways of, skin in the orange or skin in the apple. But, just keep that heart function in mind as you move forward in that space.
Right, right. Another thing that I think we can safely say about, um, you know, what can some best practices around ARGs is that, the ones that stay static and just don't improve, they're going to be performing suboptimally, as well as those ones that burn out those people who are running them.
Yeah.
Just
The
like it,
leaders.
yeah,
Poor leaders.
just like in any part of your organization, you need to be thinking about the next generation of leadership, making sure that those people have the time, the resources to do what they need to do. Because you know what, running the ARG or ERG is usually something you're doing in addition to your actual job, right? It's not something that is your core responsibility. So make sure you don't burn people out.
Yeah, your programs become more resilient when they don't depend on the leader's success and they're driving it.
Yeah. So this has been a fantastic conversation. I think some of these ideas around uh, ARGs and boundary spanning and other types of ways in which we can thrive in the face of adversity and change. Maybe we just wrap up with a handful of final points that we think are important for our audience when they're thinking about these groups within organizations.
Guys, let's use ARGs as the organizational glue, right?
Yes.
So we want to drive adaptability and boundary spanning, all the social things that you care about, the kind of positive influence and change you want to make can only really happen if you're both credible and kind of baked in across the organization.
Right, right. And I think the last thing I'll just add is that associate resource groups, employee resource groups, they really can be this connective tissue across the organization. And there are many opportunities. You need to find them, you need to look for them, you need to use them uh, for the ARG to really enhance boundary spanning and build community within the organization.